Hi there, I'm Andrew Smith. I'm the Reader Services Librarian with Williamsburg Regional Library. I'm doing a program today on Agatha Christie, which was originally developed by my colleague Avery Hicks at the Williamsburg Regional Library, a wonderful and very knowledgeable mystery collector. So welcome to the Agatha Christie Tour. We're going to be concentrating on the significant places, people, and the events in her life which she used as inspiration for her wonderful mystery stories. So, it's hard to find anyone who is unfamiliar with Agatha Christie's detective fiction. Her stories are so good that it's easy to forget that there was a real person behind them. Most people were surprised at this little old lady. In fact, she was almost ejected from an awards program by a bouncer who couldn't believe that she had murdered hundreds of people in her professional career. She is one of the most prolific and popular mystery writers of all time, with 80 novels to her credit, and she's thought to be third in line for total book sales, behind only the Bible and the complete works of William Shakespeare. She primarily wrote during the golden age of detective fiction from the 1920s to the 1940s. The golden age was defined by rules of fair play. It was developed by Ronald Knox, an English Catholic priest who actually made them into his own 10 Commandments and applied them to his writing. The goal was that readers should be able to solve the puzzle with the clues that are given. It becomes then a challenge to figure out the solution before the fictional sleuth does. Now, Christie did not invent this formula. She took a lot of influence from Arthur Conan Doyle, but she ultimately defined it. She also perfected the mechanisms of complex and convoluted plots and puzzles with a small circle of suspects, the locked room scenarios, red herrings, and surprise endings. As she was at her most prolific between the two world wars, her books offered a sense of escapism, and in a time when death was occurring in huge number, her stories presented a scenario in which an individual death mattered and could be resolved and closure given. Good would triumph over evil, and social order was restored. Now, of course, the country she's most associated with is the UK, with a special affection for County Devon on the southwest coast, and particularly the town of Torquay. One of her appeals is her portrayal of England under simpler and better times. Her stories offered an escape for her countrymen. They took comfort in the depiction of English manor houses, of country village life, and the domestic problems of those inhabitants, even if that culture had mostly disappeared by 1918. This is a view of the harbor of Torquay, where Agatha Christie spent many, many years. So Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller was born September 15, 1890 in Torquay, Devon, to a wealthy family. Unusually for that time, she was schooled at home. She lived a somewhat lonely life without friends and became accustomed to being independent and thinking for herself. Her father died when she was 11 and left her family in an uncertain economic situation. Like most women of her era, she was educated and socialized to find a husband, but she wanted to be a writer. She sent articles and poems and manuscripts to publishers, but she was always rejected. And then, just before World War I began, she met and married a dashing pilot named Archibald Christie. During the war, she volunteered as a nurse working with wounded men from the Western Front at the hospital in Torquay Town Hall. She eventually became a paid apothecary in the hospital dispensary, where she learned about poisons. During that time, she kept coming back to an argument she had with her sister Madge in 1912. They were talking about Gaston Leroux's 1908 locked room conundrum, The Mystery of the Yellow Room. Agatha had criticized its solution, and her sister challenged her to write a mystery novel as good. So she worked on the story during quiet times and off hours, determined to create a mystery so clever that her sister would be unable to figure it out and she'd win the bet. Agatha Christie was a Sherlock Holmes fan and wanted her detective to be eccentric and arrogant like Holmes, but fussy and fastidious. It was important that he be an outsider to English culture, so she modeled him on the Belgian refugees she'd also worked with in Torquay. Not surprisingly, she chose strychnine as her first murder weapon. Although she finished the book in 1916, it was only in 1920 that the world met Hercule Poirot, the detective with the egg-shaped head, magnificent mustaches, and little gray cells in The Mysterious Affair at Styles. Although she was originally published under very disadvantageous terms, she found another publisher, and over the course of the next 8 years, she published one bestseller after another. As her success and wealth grew, friction arose in her marriage to Archie. Shortly after the murder of Roger Ackroyd, which would become her most popular book, he admitted to her that he was having an affair with one of her friends. After a brief trial reconciliation, he announced he was in love with the friend and left Agatha. She was devastated. She'd always been deeply in love with him, enamored of his good looks and his heroism. And then, on the night of December 3rd, 1926, she left home at about 9:45. The next morning, her car, with her clothes and driving license, was found parked askew on the edge of a chalk quarry. In England and the US, the cry went up, "What happened to Agatha Christie?" Newspapers speculated on how she might change her appearance to conceal her identity. And as thousands of volunteers combed the countryside and the quarry and the nearby lakes and canals were dragged for her body, suspicion fell on Archie. Then on December 14th, 11 days later, a boy spotted her in the lobby of the Swan Hydropathic Hotel in Yorkshire, registered under the name very similar to that of her husband's mistress. Her doctors diagnosed it as amnesia, citing overwork, the death of her mother, and her husband's infidelity. Now, no decent mystery buff would have accepted that in a plot, and public response was hugely negative. Many thought that she had done it for publicity or to frame her husband. Still, it didn't affect her book sales. Agatha Christie decided to get away from it all and fulfill a lifelong dream of traveling to exotic places. In 1928, she boarded the Orient Express to Baghdad for a solo trip. This was a big deal then, a woman traveling across the globe unaccompanied. On a later trip, 1931, Christie and other passengers were stranded on the Orient Express when train tracks were flooded. Wouldn't a stranded train make a great setting for a mystery novel? When she visited an archaeological dig at the biblical city of Ur in modern Iraq, she fell in love with the process. She was also to fall in love again when famed archaeologist Leonard Woolley invited her to a dig and introduced her to his colleague Max Mallowan. They were married in 1930. She also got inspiration for another story from Woolley's wife, Catherine, who was apparently quite difficult to live and work with. Catherine would be the model for Louise Leidner, the wife of the archaeological expedition leader and the murder victim in Murder in Mesopotamia. That is a writer's revenge. And of course, her Middle East experiences gave her fodder for 4 more of her bestsellers. Max and Agatha fell into a routine. Agatha joined him each year on archaeological digs, spending Christmases and summers in England. She loved the Middle East and never complained about the primitive living conditions. In fact, the lack of modern distractions had a stimulating effect on her writing, and between 1930 and 1938, she produced 15 mysteries. She also helped on the digs, photographing, preserving, and cataloging recovered artifacts, and using her nursing training to treat expedition members. But the Torquay area continued to be part of her life. She bought Greenway House, overlooking the River Dart in 1938, and although she never wrote any of her books there, it became a summer home and retreat for her until her death in 1976. Christie referred to Greenway as the loveliest place in the world. Now, she may not have done any writing at Greenway, but she certainly used it in her books. The wooded gardens at Greenway look down on the River Dart. In Five Little Pigs, Amyas Creole met his death in these gardens via a poisoned glass of beer. The boathouse and river were featured in Dead Man's Folly. A murder weekend is planned at the country estate, but the girl, Marlene Tucker, who plays the victim, is really murdered in the boathouse. Real life did intrude on her at Greenway. When the government requisitioned it during World War II, she began an itinerant life that lasted until the 1950s. Fortunately for her, unlike so many other owners of grand houses, the men stationed here did little damage. In fact, one painted a mural on the walls and ceiling in the study, and she admired it so much that she left it. And by the way, Agatha's grandson, Matthew, donated Greenway to Britain's National Trust, and it was restored and opened to the public in February of 2009. Visitors who've wandered through the rooms say they can really feel her presence. It seems like Agatha Christie will return home at any minute. She also took inspiration from the rest of the world around her. When visiting Greenway, she often caught the train to Churston Station, where she would be picked up by car. Hercule Poirot traveled on this train in the ABC Murders, of course, the sea crime taking place in Churston, and in Dead Man's Folly. And Devon's West Coast offered breathtaking settings for her novels as well. Berg Island is in the forefront, and mainland Big Berry-on-Sea village is behind. Berg Island served as the setting for two of Christie's novels, Evil Under the Sun and Then There Were None. She visited Berg Island often and wrote portions of two novels there. In fact, there's a room at the hotel that's named for her, which contains the actual desk at which she worked. In Evil Under the Sun, this hotel is renamed the Jolly Roger and is where Hercule Poirot is staying on vacation. This is the private beach near Berg Hotel. In Evil Under the Sun, Arlena Stewart is found strangled here. And then there were none, or 10 little Indians, 10 people, of course, invited to Indian Island by an unknown benefactor, and one by one they are killed off on the isolated, inaccessible little island. In the book, Indian Island was not accessible during low tides, but it is in reality. And then there were none. So who did it? This was one of Agatha Christie's favorite mysteries. She had also attended many social functions at the Imperial Hotel in her youth. She transformed it into the Majestic in Peril at End House, and Poirot and his sidekick Captain Hastings stay here during the investigation. The Hotel Terrace is also the setting for the final chapter of Sleeping Murder, Christie's last full-length Miss Marple, which she wrote during World War II and stored in a safe to be published posthumously in 1976. Now, from Devon, let's visit some places in Cheshire, including Abney Hall, the home of Agatha Christie's brother-in-law, James Watts, Madge's husband. Christie visited here often, and it was her, quote, greatest inspiration for country house life, serving as Styles in The Mysterious Affair at Styles, End House in Peril at End House, Chimneys in The Secret of Chimneys, Stony Gates, They Do It With Mirrors, and Gossington Hall, The Body in the Library. Christie even dedicated the short story, The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding, her fond memories of childhood Christmases spent there. And near Abney Hall was Marple Hall, which she visited often. Does that name sound familiar? Miss Marple was based on the character of Caroline Shepherd in the 1926 Hercule Poirot novel, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Christie was getting a little tired of Poirot, so in 1930 she introduced Miss Marple in Murder at the Vicarage. Miss Marple was somewhat of a foil to Poirot. Whereas he touted logic and deduction, Miss Marple applied her experiences of human nature to solving crimes. Miss Marple was based on Christie's grandmother, Margaret Miller, or Auntie Granny. The tape recordings unearthed recently by Agatha Christie's grandson reveal the extent to which she based the Miss Marple character on her grandmother. Quote, although a completely cheerful person, she always expected the worst of anyone and everything, and with almost frightening accuracy, she was usually proved right. Now, in addition to her published works, there's The Mousetrap. It is the longest continuously running play in the world, with more than 27,000 performances to date. Originally, it was a radio play that was taken from a true story. Christie first adapted it as a short story and then put it on the stage. Now, under the terms of its production, you can't get a copy of the story in England, and no movie version can be made until 6 months after the play has closed. Technically, that could get started now because COVID closed The Mousetrap on March 16th. I wouldn't look for it at Newtown anytime soon. In 1952, she gave the copyright to her grandson for his 9th birthday. If it was your 9th birthday, would you have preferred getting an electric train or a pony or a copyright to a play that you probably would never see or never had seen? Agatha Christie kept writing until for the rest of her life, but all good things must come to an end. In 1975, she released her last Poirot mystery, Curtain, featuring an ailing Poirot. On August 1st, 1975, his obituary appeared on the front page of the New York Times, the only obituary of a fictional character they ever published. Christie herself died 5 months later on January 12, 1976, at the age of 85. And most people are familiar with her work through film and television. Christie disliked many of the movies based on her books because they did not stay true to the stories. But Albert Finney's portrayal in Murder on the Orient Express won Christie's approval, except she thought Finney's mustache was not extravagant enough. So, which one of these do you like best? Albert Finney, Peter Ustinov, Alfred Molina, Kenneth Branagh, or David Suchet? We polled viewers on this earlier, and David Suchet won with almost 75% of the vote. And what about Miss Marple? Margaret Rutherford, Joan Hickson, Geraldine McEwen, Julia Mackenzie, or Angela Lansbury? Well, Margaret Rutherford won this poll, which is surprising because she only made 4 comic films, and Agatha Christie despised those. I think she would have been happy with any of the others, though, and their long-running TV series. If you'd like to know more about the life of Agatha Christie, Williamsburg Regional Library has her autobiography, which was written over a period of 15 years and completed in 1965. It was published posthumously in 1977, but of course did not address events in her life after 1965. Andrew Eames' 855 to Baghdad, 2005, the author retraces the steps on her first train trip to the Middle East via the Orient Express and discusses the places and people that influenced her fiction, especially Murder on the Orient Express. Duchess of Death is the newest Christie biography, published in 2009. It was unofficial, unapproved, but it addresses her disappearance in depth. This is a fascinating and a good read. The last time I checked, Williamsburg Regional Library has an audio CD, but you might want to go to the catalog for that one. And then there's Agatha Christie, A Reader's Companion by Vanessa Wagstaff, which came out in 2006. This book is a delight. It addresses each of Agatha Christie's novels chronologically with each entry accompanied by gorgeous photographs. It really brings her books to life. Now, here are a couple that we don't own, but may be able to get through interlibrary loan if you're interested. The only book published under her second married name, Agatha Christie Malawan, is Come Tell Me How You Live, which was published in 1946. In this, she recounts life on an archaeological dig and praises her husband, the practice of archaeology, the Middle East, and its people. Then Janet Morgan's Agatha Christie, a biography, was more comprehensive than any of the others because she had access to private family papers. And so I'm going to let Dame Agatha, have the final words for this program. For more slides, and then there were none. Thanks again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. For other events at the library, please go to our webpage at wrl.org/events. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks.